with me. During the 90s, I went through a very rough time in my life. After a failed marriage, I became a bit of a nomad, wandering across country on foot with no particular destination. It was a stupid idea, but I was in a very hopeless place back then, and just looking to experience something new. I've been traveling down South Dakota and hitched a ride with a truck driver into Nebraska. For those of you who have never been to that state, there are large sections of land that go on for miles with nothing but cornfields lining either side of the road. We split ways at a rest stop, and I made my way into what I now know to be the Sand Hills of Nebraska. The Sand Hills region is one of the most isolated areas in the United States, 20,000 square miles of nothing but dunes and prairies. I planned on hitchhiking my way to the nearest town and catching a bus to visit a friend I had in Omaha. But I found out the hard way that this stretch of road was not ideal for hitchhiking. I barely saw any cars going down this road, and the ones that did completely ignored me. 12 hours had passed, and I was running low on food and water. I was utterly exhausted at this point, and I needed to find a place to rest for a while. I had about an hour left of daylight. Lucky for me, I happened to come upon an old farmhouse that was situated about a half-mile away from the main road. From a distance, I thought this place may have been occupied, but when I got closer, it was clear to me that this house was abandoned. This was around the fall, so weather in Nebraska wasn't terrible. However, the nights were a bit on the cold side, so I decided to hold up in this house for the night and continue my journey the next day. I had enough supplies to last me one more night. The house was your typical rotting husk. Smelled like mold, severe water damage, creaking floors, etc. The living room seemed to be the only decent place to settle down at, so I unpacked my sleeping bag and eventually dozed off. I woke up to the sound of floorboards creaking. I immediately sat up and listened. I could hear several pairs of footsteps thudding all around the house. They were coming from upstairs, downstairs, on the back porch outside, and even in the same room with me. But I didn't see a thing. I quickly got to my feet and walked over to the nearest window and peered out. What I saw was truly alarming and sent a wave of nausea through my entire body. Several cloaked figures were standing side by side. They appeared to be encircling the house. Because of the footsteps I heard, I thought there may have been people in the house with me. So in an effort to defuse things, I made another big brain decision and spoke up. Hello? I'm sorry if I'm trespassing. I was just looking for a place to rest for the night. I thought this place was abandoned. Again, I'm sorry. All the footsteps stopped at once. An eerie silence followed. It was so quiet that I could have heard a mouse shitting in the corner. I got this real bad feeling in my gut, so I reached into my backpack and pulled out my hunting knife. I gathered the rest of my things and slowly moved out into the hallway. Aside from the mysterious figures outside, I was also thinking of what was making those footsteps inside the house. As I said, I heard several footsteps when I woke up, so I figured it wouldn't be long before I ran into someone inside the house. But after combing the entire downstairs, I didn't see or hear anything. I could tell something was very off. That bad feeling I mentioned earlier intensified, despite the fact that I knew there was a bunch of weirdos in cloaks waiting for me outside. Something told me that if I didn't leave the house that very moment, something terrible was going to happen to me. The house was located in a wide open clearing. Beyond the clearing was a barrier of tall grass. When I left through the front door, I stopped directly in front of the house. No matter which direction I looked, I saw another hooded menace blocking my way. I suddenly felt this heat on my back. I quickly turned around. I cannot explain how this happened. Moments before, I was inside that house, walking around, and it was now on fire. I backed away. I decided I was going to run through the figures and get the hell out of Dodge, but when I turned back around, The figures were nowhere in sight. Things were getting way too bizarre for me at that point. The only thing I knew for sure was that I had to get the fuck out of that place. When I got back out to the main road, I didn't stop walking until I finally got to a town, whose name I can't remember. The rest of my time in Nebraska went well, and I got my life together shortly after I got back home from my trip. As long as I live, I'll never forget that old farmhouse and those mysterious cloaked figures. This incident still baffles me to this day, but perhaps some things are best left unanswered.
Have you guys experienced this before? Of course, I can tell you that I'm a very normal person. However, I felt like I'm a psychopath when I was very young. Whenever I talk about this, it feels like I'm talking about someone else, but it's definitely my memory. Let me tell you some of my childhood memories. I'm going to start my first story lightly. My mom said that when I was young, I would often pick up a few worms from the ground, bring them home, and divide them into a few pieces with a shovel. Secondly, I dimly remember it, but after fighting with my sister, I always couldn't hold back my anger. So I used to walk around with a blade cutter to make a rattling sound, putting the blade up and down. My third story is, just when I learned walking around, I happily went to greet my second sister bringing a knife when she came home. That's what my mom said to me too. She said I especially liked knives when I was young, and I don't know why. The fourth story, one day my mom went to the bathroom to take a shower, leaving me alone in the living room. As I was a little child back then, I was watching TV, and there was a scene about a doctor who was doing surgery. And I guess I wanted to copy his motion with the same way. So I stabbed myself in the stomach with a knife a little bit. My mom came out of the bathroom at the same time, and of course she was very surprised and even shocked. She took me to the emergency room that day. I had a slight surgical scar on my stomach until when I was in elementary school, so that can be a proof that it's a literally true story. The fifth, I recently found an album in the wardrobe a few days ago. The pictures were mainly about me and my mom. However, some of my mom's pictures in the album were kind of weird. It's like her eyes were cut out as someone had purposely pierced it. "Hey Mom, what's wrong with these pictures?" I asked her. And she answered, "When you were a kid, you would always get angry and pierce my eyes on every picture of me whenever you argued with me." My mom in those pictures was smiling pretty when she was young, but I've ruined all of them. I felt really sorry. When I wrote down like this, I thought I was crazy or something, seriously. But when I was talking with my mom about the past, I didn't believe that I did it. And finally, the last story is the main point of why I had to write this, because this is the one that only I remember and which is that my mom will never know. I still don't know why. Anyway, I was in elementary school at the time. One day around 3 p.m., my mom came back from work and fell asleep on the couch. And like a psycho in a thriller movie, I grabbed a big knife in the kitchen and slowly approached my mom. I went right in front of her and just stood there staring at her for a long time. At this time, I felt like it was me doing this, but on the other hand, it was not me. Then I remember that she twisted a little, as if she was going to wake up, and being surprised, I put the knife back in place. This story is a secret that I can never tell my mom, no matter how much time goes by. Pretty goosebumps, huh? But there's something even more creepy. Not long ago, my mom told me about her childhood story with her grandmother. And turned out, she once stood behind my grandma's back holding a knife when she was a little kid, like me. But when Grandma turned around and asked my mom what she was holding there, she finally recovered her consciousness, and she put the knife back in the kitchen. You see, it's a very similar story to mine. Of course, she never knows what I did that day. She just told me her story accidentally. Don't you guys think it's creepy? I'm just wondering if the psychopath's temperament is the reason of genetics influence.
I never had a problem with insects. However, spiders were the only exception, because I was bitten by one a few years ago. So this is what happened to me. I was only 12 years old at the time. That day, we had a small party at school, where everyone had to bring something to eat. I went to the big table where the others had already put everything in place. After I found an empty seat, I took my small airtight container out of my backpack, but I froze as soon as I opened it. There were only insects left inside, and I could see some of the bugs falling on my legs and on both of my shoes. Everyone was staring at me in complete silence, especially my teacher, who was even more terrified. She asked me how long the food had been in the container. Of course, I explained to her that I had only wrapped it this morning, but I was literally able to see all the insects moving around inside the container. Besides, this situation in front of my classmates was incredibly uncomfortable for me. It was embarrassing. That's why I ran to the restroom, trying to get rid of the insects. It was during the winter season, so when I headed home, it was already dark outside. After that terrible incident, I was walking along the usual route in a depressed mood, and suddenly, I heard rustling behind me. I stopped and looked around, but I couldn't see anything that could make that sound. Oh, well, it's probably just my imagination. However, as I continued to walk, I saw a middle-aged man with a disgusting face and greasy hair standing in front of me. "What are you doing out here all alone so late, young lady?" he asked me with a deep, low voice, and I replied that I was just on my way home, while nervous. None of my neighbors were there at the time. I froze and couldn't move a single muscle when he asked me if I was hungry. I know, I was such a fool. I answered yes. Then he offered me some of his food, but I turned it down at first. I was only thinking about what I should do at that moment and how I could escape from the horrible situation. But when he opened his container, I couldn't believe my eyes. A horrible smell got into my nose and I saw it. The bugs. A crowd of insects flew in my face with a deafening loud sound. In horror, I screamed and fell to my back on the road. My arm must have been injured, but I didn't have any time to feel my injury. When my gaze slowly went upwards, this weird man slowly took a bug and he ate it. As soon as I saw this very sight, I felt like I was going to throw up at any moment. All of a sudden, something started crawling up my leg, and there were spiders all over it. Being extremely terrified, I jumped up immediately and ran as quickly as I could. Fortunately, he didn't follow me, and I never saw that man again around my town. But the insect phobia has remained. I didn't tell my family about that incident because they wouldn't believe me anyway. Every time I see insects, the thought of him comes back to me. Even a ladybug scares me now. Nevertheless, there is a question that never leaves my head. If I had failed to run away that day, what would the man have tried to do with me?
I moved into an apartment a few years ago. Our new house seemed a little dark, and it was still chilly in the middle of summer. And after moving into the house, my family conspicuously began to act a little strange. One day, my parents were in the living room and sitting and watching TV, and something was weird. My dad was laughing with his eyes and mouth wide open, ha ha ha, laughing like this, and my mom was giggling like crazy. However, I was very young at that time, so I would often copy that figure, thinking that was kind of play for adults. And another day, they would have a conversation lying down at the kitchen table. Should we go now? No, later. No, we should go now. Something like this. I began to get scared and decided to try some sort of exorcising spells that were popular in my elementary school at the time. It was a way to shout, "Go away, you Lala," 3 times before going to bed. I know it's kind of childish, but anyway, it was one night after I did this a few more times. I was about to sleep, and as soon as I lay down after turning off the lights, my parents came into my room. I felt something was not good, and being scared, I was in my bed covering my face. And they sat next to my bed, one by one. Dad sat in that narrow gap between the bed and the balcony door and whispered in my ear, "What was that? Why did you do that?" He kept whispering the same thing, and I had no choice but to pretend to be asleep with fear. Long after, I heard the door open, and when I opened my eyes to see if my parents had left, there was my mother. She was kneeling on my desk and smiling widely at me. Screaming, I ran out of the house on that road, fainted after a long run on the road, and was eventually found by the police passing by. After that, we had received help from our relatives and moved to a new apartment. One day, I had a nightmare while I was sleeping. Just realizing that I had sleep paralysis, I squeezed my voice and called my wife, and she immediately ran from my side. "Honey, are you okay?" I replied to her, Take my hand." However, the left door opened suddenly, and I could see my wife was running toward me at that moment. She held my hand, asking if I was okay, and I felt a moment of anxiety, so I turned my head to the right with all my might. The woman who ran at me at first, she was not my wife, of course. She was looking at me, dancing strangely on the spot, and jumping beside me as if she got too excited. My wife soon turned on the lights, and as soon as the lights came on, she disappeared from sight. Who was that woman? The woman in front of my window. It was the middle of the night. I was choosing my clothes for the next day's appointment. After picking out some of my clothes, I was looking at the mirror with them and suddenly heard a sound from the window. It was like someone clicked their tongue. When I looked at the window, there was a woman laughing with her face pressed down on the screen. I walked back in fear, quickly turned off the light. Then I woke up my dad, who was sleeping at that time. However, when we came back to the room, the woman was already gone. What's even scarier was that our house had its own yard, and it was on the other side of the houses in town. How did she get into our house and stand in front of my window? Whether she was a human or a ghost, I still have no idea who she was. It happened 3 years ago. On Saturday afternoon, I was hanging out with my friends, Austin, Vincent, Charlie, and Bobby, while my parents were gone for the weekend. We were playing Battlefield 1 at Austin's house, chilling and having a good time. A couple of hours later, we got bored and had nothing to do. So we went for a walk on the boardwalk, talking about what our plans are going to be for the summer. Vincent said he'll be going to Los Angeles with his family for a month, and Charlie will be in Arizona for 2 weeks. For Bobby, he'll be in London for a month, and I was going to Ocean City for a week. After we had a small chat, Austin asked me if we could go to the abandoned hospital around here. Being frightened, I was thinking that it wouldn't be a good idea to go there. However, I didn't want them to think of me as a chicken, so I agreed and decided to go there, and so did my friends. The outside was getting dark. We got into my truck and drove almost an hour to reach that destination. When we finally got there, I parked my truck right just next to the entrance, in case anything happens while we're checking out the hospital. We slowly got inside the hospital. The hallways and other rooms were empty. At first, I thought it was a little bit creepy and chilly inside. About 20 minutes later, walking around, we suddenly heard something that made our hearts drop. It was the sound of a girl screaming, saying, "Help! Somebody help me!" Then I heard some guy saying, "Shut your mouth," with a rough voice. We decided to follow the sound. When we went all the way up the stairs and got there, the dim light was coming from the room. I told my friends not to move a muscle while I was slowly approaching and peeking through the room. And what I saw was just unbelievable. A girl was taped around her legs, arms behind her back, and even her mouth now. I quietly told my friends to come to the room. I didn't see the other guy, so we quickly approached her, releasing the tape around her. "Thank you, guys," she said. "What's your name and what happened?" I asked her, and she replied, "My name is Hannah. I was kidnapped by a man 3 weeks ago while I was coming home from college." Then I asked again, "Well, what does he look like?" "I think he's mid-40s. He has black hair and he's chubby looking." She replied back, and after she gave me the details, we decided to help her escape and get back to my truck. However, we saw a movement suddenly coming from the stairway with a lighting candle. Fortunately, we found an empty dark room at that moment and hid there. And not long after, I could see a figure wearing a flannel shirt, jeans, boots, who came into the room. He was holding a big machete. I was positive that creepy man was the one Hannah was talking about. After the man passed the room where we were hiding, we got out of the room quietly without making a sound as possible as we could. We were about to get to the exit. All of a sudden, a loud scream was heard from upstairs. "You! Where the heck are you? I'm going to kill you!" My heart pounded so hard. We had no choice but just to make a run toward my truck as soon as possible. All of my friends jumped in the back of my truck, and then I quickly started the engine. As I started the engine, Austin gave a big shriek. "Holy shit, Matt, get the heck out of here right now!" I then looked behind us, and there he was. The guy was chasing after us with his big machete in his hand, and I quickly drove off. While one of my friends called the police, we pulled up at the gas station waiting for the cops to show up. They arrived in about 10 minutes. We told them exactly what happened tonight, and after we informed them where the hospital was, they went over to investigate the case. They eventually caught the man soon. He was taken into custody and after that got charged with kidnapping and attempted murder. After the police took him away, they told us they'd been searching for this man for 5 years. They also told us that he had prior convictions from the past of raping women and other kidnapping charges. And the poor Hannah. The ambulance took her to the hospital, and then we all came back to our house. After that day, we decided to never go to such places like that again. I still can't stop thinking about what would have happened if we failed to escape. Also, what would have happened to Hannah if we didn't show up? We all might be dead. I will never forget that night.
My name is Bree. This happened in 2016. I was 19 years old at the time. I was up late the night before into the early morning studying, and I hadn't had much sleep, so I had just woken up from a nap. I decided to hop in the shower to wake myself. That's when I heard this weird scraping sound coming from somewhere outside. I stopped the shower and peered out from behind the curtain, and then made my way over to the window. I saw nothing, but I could still hear the noise. I thought it may have been my neighbor working in a shed, so I ignored the disturbance and finished up in the shower. Before I continue, I should inform you that I have severe anxiety problems, and I often get a little paranoid sometimes. It also doesn't help that I have PTSD as well. Anyways, I was now back in my room, and I took a seat on my bed. I texted my then boyfriend and asked him what he wanted for dinner. While I was waiting for him to respond, I just relaxed and scrolled through my Facebook. I was reading an article about the recent clown sightings that were happening at the time, when I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming from outside. I stopped and listened carefully. I heard a few more steps, followed by a tapping noise. I was a bit confused by this. It hadn't yet occurred to me that I had an unwelcomed guest outside. I was thinking why my boyfriend hadn't knocked on the door or called before he showed up. We usually had a routine with things like this, especially if I was home alone. He would either text, call, or FaceTime me to let me know when he was on his way home, or if he was at the door, because there had been a lot of shady activity around our neighborhood at the time. I then called out to him, and suddenly, all fell silent. I texted him and asked if he was at the door. There was no reply, so I decided to peek through the bedroom window. While I was making my way to the other side of the room, my phone started ringing. It was my boyfriend wanting to FaceTime. When I answered, he said he was about 15 minutes away. As I was talking to him, I pulled back the curtains of my bedroom window, and that's when all the blood in my veins turned to ice as I came face to face with a fucking clown. I know I wasn't hallucinating. An actual clown was looking at me through the window, smiling. After my initial shock, I actually started to laugh, thinking that this had to be some kind of prank my boyfriend was pulling on me. So I played along, pretending to be terrified, and whispered into the phone, "Very funny, asshole. Love the whole scary clown thing." I chuckled and rolled my eyes. My boyfriend was confused, and I explained to him about the clown at the window, and said that he and his friend did a good job scaring the piss out of me. He seemed confused, saying that all of his friends were hanging out at the pub, and that he was not a part of any plan to prank me. Upon hearing this, I felt my stomach in my throat as I looked back at the clown, who was still just outside my window. He reached into his costume and pulled out a very real-looking butcher's knife. By this point, I wasn't sure what was going on, so I grabbed my baseball bat. My boyfriend told me that he was now only a few minutes away. He shouted at me to stay inside and to lock all the doors and windows. I quickly closed the curtains and went into the lounge. It wasn't long before I heard a loud pounding on the front door. Suddenly, I heard a creepy voice coming from the other side.
"Let me in, child."
I didn't respond to the voice. I just stood perfectly still, waiting for the next move. Loud pounding rang out again, causing the door to rattle on its hinges, but I kept quiet, even when I heard the doorknob rattling. Although I was pretty scared at this point, I was also getting a tad irritated, and yelled out to the clown, "Fuck off! Go annoy someone else!" I then heard muffled laughter, followed by the creepy voice.
"Please let me in, doll. I just want to play. I want to play with your insides."
I had enough of this. I was about to go out and confront this creepy asshole myself when I heard my boyfriend's voice, who was still on the phone, say, "Hang up and call the cops." After some consideration, I thought that maybe confronting the creepy clown outside with a butcher's knife was not the correct course of action. So I did as my boyfriend said. I left the lounge and was soon explaining to the police dispatcher the situation. I was on my way back to my room when I heard the sound of glass breaking. I stopped in my tracks and told them that I think the clown just broke into the house. They immediately told me to get somewhere safe, and that's when I heard my ex yelling out, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing? Get the hell out of here. The police are on the way." The clown just bellowed out a psychotic laugh and took off. As I made my way back into the bedroom, something caught my eye. I peered out the window. Through a gap in the curtains, I saw another clown. He appeared to be holding some kind of saw blade in his hand. I went to move, but I was like a deer caught in the headlights. I couldn't move or scream. Fear then overcame me, as I realized my boyfriend was now out there with 2 creepy clowns. I screamed into the phone, "There's another clown outside my bedroom. Please hurry." After a few moments, I was relieved when I heard my boyfriend at the back door. I quickly let him inside. We then held each other tightly until the police arrived. After taking our statements, the police discovered a rusted hacksaw and an axe lying on the ground outside of my bedroom window. There were red marks all over them. Of course, the creepy clowns that had turned my night into a freak show were nowhere to be found. After that night, I struggled to fall asleep. I often think to myself, what would have happened to me if I had been stupid enough to open that door? Were they just a couple of thrill seekers looking to frighten a girl who was all alone? Or were they, in fact, out for blood?
A few years ago, it was in January. It was so cold that our town was all frozen, and the streets were very quiet back then. I was living on the second floor of the apartment building at that time, and I could see a small park and a bench in the direction of my balcony. One night, it was around 9 p.m. My cell battery had just died, so I went near the balcony to pick up my charger, and I saw a child sitting on a bench about 30 meters away. It was snowing heavily outside at the time, so I thought it was a little weird for a child to sit on a bench alone in the middle of the night, especially on this cold day. However, I soon decided not to care about him, thinking that he's just waiting for his parents. Then I surfed the website for a while, and it was about 12 a.m. I went back to the balcony to lock the window, and that kid, he was still sitting on the bench. Looking at the back of his head, I began to worry that something might be wrong with him. So after thinking about it for a long time, I posted a post on the website I often go. "Guys, there's a child out there in this time. Should I call the police?" I then looked back at the bench. Maybe I can talk to him for a second. Thinking like this, I opened the window and shouted at the child. Hey kid!" He seemed not to hear my voice. He was just sitting there, not even looking at me. I shouted to him a few more times, then gave up. Went back to the living room checking the comments, and there was one comment caught in my eyes. "Hey, listen, that is not a human. Just shut the door and go to sleep. Do not talk to him." I got goosebumps. I slowly went out to the balcony again, and to my surprise, the child was gone. Was he a real ghost, or just gone somewhere? Thinking like this, I tried to shut the window that I had left open earlier, and looked down at the window inadvertently. And there was a child. He was standing in front of the first floor, still turning back. Holding my breath, I got so surprised that I quickly closed the window and locked it completely to the inner door. However, I ended up staying up all night that day. Eventually, nothing happened that day, but I still think it's the weirdest experience of my life. What if I didn't see his comment at that moment? Wouldn't that ghost have come into my house through the window? Of course, that kid may be a real person, but I still can't forget the back of his head.
I currently live in South Korea, and this story is about my experience. I used to suffer from nightmares without any reason during my freshman midterm exam. At first, I couldn't remember my dream well, when I woke up and just thought it was because of stress, as it was the middle of the exam period. However, the nightmare continued on and on even after the exam. and it became clearer, so I remembered it vividly in the end. And the weird thing was not just that. Exactly 4 dreams kept repeating. In the first dream, I grab a woman in hanbok from a large hanok-style house and drag her down to the front yard. Then I beat her. Second, the same woman is crying on the ground, and I pull her hair and drag her to the well at the end of the yard. Third, the woman cries with her face covered with tears and blood and begs me in front of the well, "For mercy's sake, please forgive me." Then the person who seems to be me stares at her, and then I laugh and push her into the well. Lastly, it is the strangest and the most ominous dream. I can hear a woman's voice, but all I see is a well in front of me. I approach the well, and there's a woman smiling with tears in her eyes, and she bursts out laughing and keeps on saying this: "Slow and steady wins the game." What a joy. I couldn't sleep well while I had these 4 nightmares over and over again all month long. So one day, I ended up going to a fortune teller. After he listened to my story, he said it would be more helpful to experience my past life than to interpret my dream. Half uneasiness and half doubts, I started to experience my past life. And surprisingly, it overlapped with my dream. In my past, I was a woman and I had a maid whose name was Sion. My appearance was not exceptional, and I wasn't talented, while Sion was beautiful and had many talents. Then one day, I heard from the people who seemed to be my parents that they wanted to make Sion marry someone after lying about her being their daughter instead of me. I got angry when I heard that, and the next day I grabbed Sion's hair and threw her into the front yard as soon as my parents went to the other house to discuss marriage. For no reason, she started to beg me. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry." It made me angrier, so I stomped on Sion's body violently and beat her in the face until she was covered in blood. Then her clothes slipped down, and I could see a big bruise on her belly. When Sion fell on the floor and sobbed without moving, I then grabbed her hair and headed for the well at the end of the yard. She cried and cried out for help, but I ignored it and pushed her into the well. Finally, I went back into the room and locked the door. My past life experience just ended that way. I think it would be better for you to visit her. After experiencing my past life, he introduced me to a shaman. Usually, I didn't believe that kind of stuff, and especially hated shaman stuff. But he continued. The shaman is originally a doctor. People who suffer from ghosts or spirits come to them, just as sick people are treated by doctors. But money makes people do some crazy things. So the next day, I visited the shaman with my friend. And when I started talking about my dreams and past life experiences, she suddenly laughed at me. She laughed frantically that her teeth were all exposed, but then she suddenly looked serious. Her expression was so creepy that I sat still without saying anything. Then she said, "Slow and steady wins the game. You have killed her and enjoyed your life, and you haven't even collected her body. How cruel you were. She won the game." She glared at me, but then looked up into the air and suddenly started to drop tears. Poor thing. How scary and sad she would have been. She muttered for a long time, then asked me again, suddenly with a startled look, "Do you have a baby who will be born soon?" Suddenly, I remembered that my aunt had a month left before childbirth, and that I had bought her baby shoes. I was so surprised that my eyes were wide open and stared at her. And this time, she banged the desk and asked again, "The baby, am I right?" Now, being scared of this situation, I cried and nodded. Then the shaman said, "No, you're in big trouble. It's too late. You should have killed the baby. When she spoke to herself, my friend asked, "No way. Why do they have to kill the baby? Why? This woman killed people in her past life. That wasn't enough. She threw her in the well and enjoyed her life. Her anger and resentment have piled up over and over, and now she came to her." I couldn't understand what the shaman said, so me and my friend were thinking for a long time, and she yelled again, "She will come back as a baby. Now listen to me. Do not stay with the baby after it's born. You must never be with her until her first birthday." "Why?" my friend asked. She then sighed and replied, "The baby remembers the past." After that, we left the shaman's house and went home saying that she was a freak or something like that. However, surprisingly, I no longer had nightmares after I met her. After a month and a little longer, my cousin was born. And a few days later, I visited my aunt with my mother. When she asked my aunt what her child's name was, she smiled and answered. At that moment, my heart sank with her words. "It's Sion." My mother-in-law went to the naming center for her first grandchild, and they told her to name her Sion. Then she will do well and have a healthy life. That's what they told her. I thought it was just a coincidence, but my uncle next to me laughed and said, "But hey, you know what's interesting? She has a big mole on her belly." At first, I thought something was stained, so I tried to erase it, but it wasn't that. Then, as he lifted up the baby's clothes and showed her belly, I collapsed on the floor. It reminded me of the woman's bruise I saw in my past life. I told my mom that I would go first because I wasn't feeling well and left the hospital right away. After that, I explained everything to my mom when she arrived home. She just laughed at me at first, but it seemed like she thought about my story. So she took me to a temple the next day. A monk took me and my mother to the sermon hall, and we both performed a memorial ceremony for a few days for a woman named Sion, with a sincere apology. I felt sorry for my aunt, but I had to contact her only by phone and text until the baby's first birthday party. About 2 months later, I had a dream. A woman came to me, and I could see she was crying. After I woke up, I called the shaman I had visited before, and she said, "Okay, everything is over. You'll be fine." Frankly speaking, I still don't have the courage to see my baby cousin, but hope I can smile at her and see her face